Welcome, everyone, back to our show. This is James Nelson, your host of Real Estate Investing live from New York. I'm here with Rachel Hartman, who is my writing partner. We are working on an incredible book, which is going to give you the inside edge to real estate investing. And if you have not already heard our lead up to this, we've already given you an introduction on why you should think about investing in real estate. And we talk about all the advantages, all the reasons why you can have the competitive advantage in this space, and then our episode on what to buy. And look, these are steps, and you might be thinking they're sequential one by one, but a lot of these steps also overlap. So we're going to be talking today about creating the dream team. And so, Rachel, welcome back. Thank you so much. These conversations have been a lot of fun, and I am looking forward to our conversation today.
I am as well. It's a great topic, I think, for today. We're going to be looking at how you build that team when that takes place. As you mentioned, James, there's different steps, some of which we've covered, which are really exciting, but I think it's important to keep in mind there's this whole picture at play. So we have different components we need to think about and have to realize where we put them in. I know just from talking to you and listening to your podcast, I feel like you know just about everybody in New York City and beyond. So you obviously have built an incredible network through your own experience. I think you have a very unique approach to how you do that too, which I've been impressed with. So I'm super excited to be able to go over some of these points with you and hear your thoughts on how we should go about putting together a team. I guess the first question I had is actually, when does it become a team? We've talked about making that first investment. We've talked about the advantages of going into a multifamily property, getting that start, getting that experience. When does it shift from this is me to this is me and others?
So Rachel, I love your lead up, and the first piece about this business is all about relationships, and if you want to be successful, you need the right relationships, right? And that is what's going to give you the edge. And so if you listen to the first podcast that I ever did with Bruce Ratner, he used the word people or team over 50 times in an hour-long interview. Think about that. That's over one a minute. And look, I mean, Bruce is this larger than life developer. He's built, over 50 projects across the New York skyline, the Barclays Arena. He owned the Nets. I mean, what has Bruce not accomplished? And yet, his story was about building the team and the right people. And you're knowing the right people and who to go to is really going to help you be successful, because this is not a business where you can do this on your own. So, but your first question is really important, because, you might say, well, James and Rachel, that's great. I'm interested. I want to buy, but I'm not ready to start reaching out to people because, I got to still find the opportunity. I got to figure out what I'm doing. And, there's some truth to that, right? I mean, we're not suggesting that you go and retain an attorney and start billing hours and you haven't even figured out what you want to do yet, right? But I do think it's really important to start building relationships, right? And this has been a little difficult, especially after COVID, where, for a long time, there weren't any of these industry events. But back in the peak days in 2018, 2019, I was going to a half a dozen of these events a week, right? And so where's the information that I pick up and learn about the market and what's going on? I mean, yes, I read a lot of publications. Yes, I listen to podcasts. Yes, I read books. Yes, I can read. But the where I really picked up a lot of the inside information, if you will, were meeting people at whether it's a breakfast panel and saying, hey, what are you working on? What's going? Okay, so what's what kind of rents are you achieving? What's your business plan? Where are the opportunities? meeting with attorneys. Hey, what are you working on? Who are some of your active clients? Can I be helpful? Can we help find some opportunities? How can we work together? Even the accountants, hey, what's keeping you up at night? How are you advising your clients, right? And not that I give accounting advice or legal advice, right? But at least having an understanding of what the opportunities are in the market and then being able to connect with the right people is really important. So I think, building your network, right? And your network should be real estate professionals who transact in your market, right? So if you're subscribing to, in our last show, we talked about start with your own backyard, right? So if you're looking, Rachel, to invest in Miami, you need to know attorneys who transact in Miami. And by the way, there's also a difference between, a residential attorney who maybe you bought your apartment or house with and a commercial attorney. And so, getting to meet some of these people and start having conversations and bouncing ideas off can be hugely helpful. So, I did want to give an example if we have time, because I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to kind of grasp this concept. But I think after you study the market, hopefully you have a thesis and you have a business plan that you would like to execute on. So let me throw out an idea for our listeners. And I actually think it's a pretty good business plan. And I haven't heard a lot of people, take this on. But, look, there's no question that after the pandemic, the workplace environments change. Hybrid seems to be the opportunity, the way most of these businesses are conducting. There's a lot of workers now who are entirely working from home, right? So to me, okay, if you're working from home all the time, wouldn't you need extra space for an office? What about live-work condos, live-work apartments, where you have your apartment, but you also have your office? I'll take that one step further. What if you're a maker? What if you actually have products that you design and you sell on Instagram and you need micro fulfillment? So maybe your apartment, it's not just a home office, but it's also a studio where you're actually manufacturing things and you're shipping, right? Okay, so let's say this is a segment of the market that no one's really tackled yet. Okay, so you've got this idea, and you're going to have to do research to make sure that there's truly demand for this. But then you're going to say, well, how am I going to pull this off? Okay, so you need to make sure, first of all, do you have the right zoning for this? So can you take this commercial aspect and can you put it in a residential zoning or building, right? That would be a land use attorney, right? You want to condo the building and sell off individual apartments. That's a condo attorney, right? You're gonna want to have those opinions. And so I think having, counsel representative, contacts to bounce these ideas and say, hey, what do you think about this? What are some of the obstacles? What do I want to think about doing? I think you'd be surprised how many of these professionals will, and I'm not saying they'll give you hours upon hours, but for an introductory conversation, most of the attorneys would say, look, I'm happy to have an introductory call, which is, basically free advice, right? With the expectation that, hey, if you like what you hear and there's an opportunity, let's work together. So again, this is a really long way of explaining, but I want to drill the point home that, you're expanding your network is important from day one, and also use that network to really bounce ideas off. And so then you also have the team ready to strike when you have that live opportunity.
That's great. I did actually listen to that first podcast with Bruce, which was excellent. And I was so taken aback what you said, his references to people, and then how he actually came across as such a human and personable person as well. I couldn't believe I was listening to this huge figure talk the way he was. He was so practical and seemed reachable. So I think that's one thing I took away from the podcast, is that building up that extensive network just starts with one person, and you don't necessarily need all sorts of certifications and licenses and status to get started. But I like your idea, so you have this business plan. The COVID one is great. You want to start building up a team. Talk to me about some of those main players you should keep in mind when you're building up your team, and then what they'll be contributing.
Perfect. So I might be a little biased, but I think your most important team member, if you're an investor, is a broker, right? They are the ones who are certainly going to be sourcing a lot of the opportunities. And I know we've talked, offline, and we could certainly discuss more for our listeners in a further show about on market versus off market. But in most cases, brokers are the ones who are sourcing opportunities. So that alone is a good reason to get to know a broker, to start seeing opportunities. Okay, but a good broker should also be giving you market intel, right? But there's different types of brokers, just like there's different types of attorneys. You have a sales broker, an investment sales broker. That's what I do for a living, right? But then you have leasing brokers, okay? And there's different types of leasing brokers as well. You can have an office leasing broker. You can have a retail leasing broker, right? You can have an industrial leasing broker. Those are very, again, you have to get very specific to the type of asset class. And when you're dealing with that broker, make sure that they have experience in that space, okay? That's on the commercial side, okay? If you are buying an apartment building, you're going to be likely speaking to an investment sale broker, but then you're going to also want to know, okay, well, what can I rent these apartments for? And let's take that one step further. Okay, I've got these really large, oversized one bedrooms. Is that the market? Who's my tenant base? Should I put a wall up, and should we turn these one bedrooms into two bedrooms? Am I looking for students to rent this? Am I looking for young professionals? Am I looking for families? That would be a question to ask for a residential broker, right? Residential brokers, you could have rental, apartment brokers, you could have condo, apartment sale brokers, townhouse brokers. So again, make sure if you're getting advice from a residential broker on renting apartments, make sure that broker you're speaking to has done similar projects, right? Okay, so that covers the brokerage sphere, okay? We've already talked a little bit about attorneys and the different types of attorneys, but let me just spell it out for you again. So you have transactional real estate attorneys. Those are the ones who are doing your purchase and sale contracts when you want to buy, when you want to sell. They likely also work with the bank when you are negotiating your loan docs. So, but then you also have land use counsel. So if you're thinking you want to make sure that can you do a project, is the property as of right? Do you need any changes? Do you, and some, New York City, pretty much everything's as of right, but sometimes you go into the suburbs and nothing's as of right. You have to go and you have to get approval. So your first stop is probably land use counsel to figure out what you can do or can't do. There's landlord tenant attorneys. Okay. Those are, those are the attorneys that they're going to help you do the diligence up front to make sure you understand, okay, what do these leases look like in New York or an environment that has regulation? They need to see, okay, let's look at what you have here. The owner is saying these are fair market apartments. Are they fair market, or should they be regulated? What kind of exposure is there? And then if once you own the property, if you have a tenant who holds over, you need an attorney to actually evict that tenant. That it would be a landlord tenant attorney. Okay, so there's also tax attorneys if you want to challenge your tax bills. So plenty of attorneys out there as well. Plenty of brokers, plenty of attorneys. And then you have your accountant, right? Which is, the way you structure the transaction, how you file, making sure you maximize. We talked about a lot of tax benefits in that first episode of why real estate. So you're going to want to make sure that you're working with an accountant that has dealt with other professional real estate investors, right? So that's important. If you're really looking to build a real estate portfolio, you need to make sure and deal with professionals who have experience dealing with real estate investors. Okay, so then we've got, if you're looking to do a project where you need to do renovations, you're going to need an architect who can help draw plans. You're going to need a general contractor who's actually going to do the work. If it's a large enough project, sometimes you'll also bring on an owner's rep. That's someone who's actually your representative. You might say, hey, I don't know about construction and I need someone looking out for me. Now, for a small apartment renovation, that might not make a lot of sense. But for, a larger building wide renovation, yeah, you might need someone overseeing the project on your behalf. So Rachel, I might have forgotten a couple of people, and certainly there are, pieces that are vital to the transaction. A title agent, that's the person who actually researches the title of the property to make sure that you are buying free and clear title. They provide insurance. There's mortgage brokers, very important, are out there to help you arrange financing, right? They're going to put out multiple options for you. So off the top of my head, I think you've got your team there who can help you transact. But if I've forgotten anyone, you can let me know. And I also have a place to check, because I'm actually part of an organization that I helped co-found called RESA. RESA is the Real Estate Services Alliance. And if you go back to some of the earlier episodes, I had some of my friends from the group come in, but our organization handles every aspect of the real estate business. So I'm actually looking at our page right now at resanyc.com, and I'm seeing, these are our categories of members. We have brokers, we have lending, so the mortgage broker and the bank. We have legal, we have the transactional, management. That's the one that I forgot. Okay, so third-party manager. Okay, and I think we talked a little bit initially about why real estate, how to approach this. It's hands-on. Even if you have a third-party manager who's collecting rent, paying your bills, your job is the asset manager, because you're watching the overall situation, making sure everything takes place correctly. But that, I think now I feel like I've given our listeners plenty of people to think about.
Yeah, it is a comprehensive list, but I think it's worth going over, because I think it emphasizes the important role that people play in this. So like you said, it's a relationship game. You're going to have people involved. That's almost something that you're building in as you carry out these investments. So I'm curious, now that we've gone over this listing, what you would consider some best practices as you're building a team? For example, how do we vet people we're bringing in on our team? You mentioned some things like research. I'm curious if you have referrals, places you can go. What are best practices for bringing on the best team?
Rachel, it's a great question. And the good news is that once you really have a couple good contacts, if you have a good real estate broker or a good attorney who's really plugged in, they will help make introductions, right? So that's super helpful, right? Because if someone was looking to invest in New York and they needed some recommendations for any of these components, I could certainly make some recommendations. The other thing is, look, we've talked about, for your first deal, you're likely going to be partnering with someone. Your value is you're going to be finding the opportunity, but you're likely going to be partnering with someone trusted, someone who you've known, someone who's done this before. Likely they're going to have their own relationships as well, which really helps, because especially, sometimes you don't really know how you work with someone until you've been through a transaction. And, not that anything's perfect, but, and also I have a lot of clients who have multiple attorneys, and it depends, maybe for a smaller deal or a certain type of seller, you want a certain type of attorney. And sometimes it's good when you kind of match things up. I mean, if you have, if you're buying a large institutional size, property, and the seller's using a big name law firm, you might need to bring in, the same type of team to kind of match that and make sure that you can move things along. And if it's, a solo practice counsel on the seller's side and want to make for an easier transaction, you might match it up with a smaller practice. So again, that goes back to my earlier point, that it's good to have, meet people, have multiple connections, but I think also having friends in the business who can make referrals. And that's certainly for me as a broker, the best, business when I have someone who calls me up and says, James, I just spoke to, Mr. So-and-so, you just sold a property for, and it's time for our family to sell our property. We'd love for you to take a look at it. Or I get a lot of referrals from attorneys, and when I get that referral, it's, first of all, I take those referrals very seriously, because that person has taken, they're putting their name on the line by referring me. So I better deliver, and I better go out of my way to make sure that their client is taken care of. So again, that goes back to, there's a lot of referrals in this business too.
Definitely. That's a good point. I know one question I wanted to ask, and you can, use your experience or others. I'm curious how teams can fluctuate over time. Is it uncommon to see you start out with an attorney, 30 years later, you tend to see the person with the same attorney, maybe not necessarily. And I know life happens. I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about those fluctuations, because obviously we're talking, if we say create your dream team, what exactly are we saying? Is that something that waxes and wanes, varies by project, will last for the next 4 decades? Break that down a little bit for us, if you could.
Great question. I think in a perfect world, if you can do repeat business with the same team, it saves a ton of time, because there's a learning curve, right, with how you work. I mean, a mortgage broker is the best example. I mean, you go and whether you're getting acquisition financing, you're refinancing. I mean, I don't know if you've gone for a loan lately, but, I just did one, and I felt like the bank was asking for everything, including my 4th grade report card, when, and a note from my mother saying it was okay for me to borrow. But, in all seriousness, that mortgage broker assisting me knows, has my, my financial records, has that information where it's ready, it's prepared in the right way. And so it makes a lot of sense to do repeat business, right? And especially, with lenders. And Jeff Ravitz, who I had on my show, and we were actually texting back and forth about a large multifamily project that he's bidding on today, said that he really, when you talk about relationships, lenders are really important. And even if you're using that mortgage broker to help you negotiate the terms, having that go-to lender who knows you as a borrower and has comfort. Because the first piece of business, that's the toughest one, right? You got to get them all, you got to get them comfortable with you, help to understand how you're going to work. But once you've had a success story where, okay, great, this investor bought the deal, they did what they said, they delivered, the bank got paid off, great, let's go do it again, right? And so, that's really how you want to see things happen, is, these repeat transactions. So, and if you listen to one of my more recent podcast with Robert Ravani, he talks about trading up, and he's buying, improving, selling, buying, improving, selling. And so having that team that can do volume and just keep cranking is really important. That being said, sure, over time, if you start doing different types of transactions, and maybe you've got an attorney who's really good at vetting multifamily properties and negotiating those deals, but you start getting into retail and you need an attorney who's really good at negotiating, retail leases and purchases. Sometimes you'll need to bring new people into the fold if a specialty is required.
Exactly. That makes sense. So we've talked about different aspects, different people on the team, how that might change over time, how to find them. What do you say when someone comes up to you, so we're looking at getting started, someone who's getting started in this investment space, they know they need to build a team, and they say, who should be my first player? Who should be my first addition? Do you usually answer that depends? Or, when we talk about prioritizing and getting started, what are some of your recommendations?
Again, I've got to go with the broker. First of all, Rachel, one thing is you can talk to me as long as you want. And I'll never send you a bill for how many hours, right? Once you have that free conversation with the attorney, you're going to start that they're going to ask you for that retainer letter, and you're going to start getting billed by the hour. So then you start choosing your words very carefully. But yeah, no, in all seriousness, I mean, brokers are, a lot of them are generalists in that because their job is to bring seller and buyer together. Yes, they need to find the opportunity. They need to be able to present it. They need to bring things together. But we also have to be in the business of solving problems. So if I have a property where I know there's a tenancy issue or there's a zoning, problem, if I'm doing my job and I'm a good broker, I am helping identify that situation up front. And then I'm going to help you figure out a solution, right? Or at least who you can talk to and say, Rachel, okay, here's the situation. We're selling this building. It's a great opportunity. It's priced well below the comparables, but there's this one problem. There's a tenant who's holding over, and we're going to sell it as is. So you're going to have to handle this, right? So, but don't worry, we've done a little research. This is what we would advise. And by the way, we've got a landlord tenant attorney who already knows the situation. They've got a plan on how you could address this. Why don't you talk to this landlord tenant attorney and they can help you figure this out, right? So, not only can that broker, again, start telling you, what they're seeing out there, right? But they can start connecting the dots and making introductions. It's interesting, but I think I rarely, well, occasionally I get asked this, but I'll get asked, James, you see a lot of opportunities out there. What would you be buying in this market? What do you think is interesting? What business plans do you like, right? And look, I think that's another idea is maybe talking to enough brokers out there, you can get some good ideas on some business plans that you can try to implement.
Yeah, that's so true. I personally was thinking broker, but wanted to have you confirm since you're the much more of the expert in this space than me. So we touched a little bit on this, but I'm curious from an educational standpoint, learning the business, what are costs that come with it? Maybe we don't want to say cost, but just what do you need to keep in mind? Obviously, we're talking about making investments to get great returns, getting that project. You need a team to do it. You can sometimes have free consultations, there's networking, but obviously there comes a point where there are fees involved. Talk a little bit about what we should know about that, how that's handled.
Right. So, and as I said earlier, brokers are success-based, right? So, a seller pays a broker commission when they sell, or sometimes if a buyer, you have a buyer's broker, they'll get paid by the buyer on sale. But occasionally, in that landlord tenant situation, if there's, some kind of, negotiation or buyout, I mean, maybe on rare occasions that's on a success basis, but for most part, they're hourly. And they should give you an estimate of what that's going to look like. An architect, for example, will probably charge you on a certain percentage of the hard costs of the project. Managing agents are going to charge you, a couple percentage points, could, depending on the size of the property, could be, and type of property, could be 2%, it could be 6% of the annual rent. And so, mortgage brokers are also paid on a success basis when the loan closes, a percentage of the lease. So that's really kind of the breakdown between the success-based salespeople, if you will, and the professionals who are paid hourly. But one overarching comment I would like to make is that, the old adage, you get what you pay for. Sometimes people think, okay, well, hey, I don't want to, pay for the best professional in this space because, and let's maybe talk about, we'll pick on attorneys. Maybe this person's hourly fee is double someone else's. Well, look, if you talk about land use counsel, for example, if you get one of the best land use attorneys, they they may be able to pull something off that no one else would, or they might see a loophole, an opportunity. And when you're looking at the grand scheme of, let's say you're doing a development project for 40, 50 that could become 100,000 feet. Sure, you're going to pay more fees and a higher hourly rate, but if they can unlock more value, or think of it another way, if they have a lot of experience in this great track record, yes, they might charge a higher hourly, but it might take them a lot less time to do it because they already know how to get there, right? They already have they can expedite it. They can get it to the top of the stack. So don't always choose, your best professional by who will give you, the cheapest rate. And I get this every time I meet with clients about selling their property, because all fees are negotiable. And they'll say, James, I see your proposal, but your fee's higher than some of the other brokers that we've spoken to. I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. What has that broker told you they're going to do? What's their marketing plan? Did they put together a comprehensive broker's opinion of value like I have? Do they have a comprehensive marketing strategy? No, but they said they had a couple, buyers who were interested. I said, okay, so are you paying this broker to make a couple of phone calls, or are you actually, paying for someone to run a full marketing process, right? And then, the question then is, okay, well, if my fee is a little more expensive, do you think, at the end of the day, you're interested in if you're going to net more money, right? So even if my commission's a little bit higher, don't you think we're going to get a higher price and you'll net more money? So that's the way you need to think about fees, is really a return on investment, right? And are you with the best professionals for what you're doing? And I'm not talking about overkill. If you're doing a small project, you don't need to bring in the best land use attorney in the city, right? Maybe they have someone at their office who's a junior who charges at a lower hourly rate. Or look, maybe the local a smaller solo practice land use attorney's fine. If they can show you, okay, I've done 10 of these in the last year, I know how to do this, right? So it's getting the right professional for the job.
Exactly. I completely agree. And that point actually feeds into some of these other things we've discussed about, and you've talked about in other podcasts, where you're looking, how can we add value? So if some of those fees play into that value component, I think that's a really good factor that you said, something to definitely consider. And then also, you get what you pay for. So if there's something that they're, like you said, they're charging more, but you're getting a lot more, there's definitely value to that too. So one of the last things I want to go over, I have to ask, anything you would say about red flags when building a team? I'm not necessarily referring to horror stories, but just almost things that we should be aware of. I think so much of newcomers, we're just getting started. There's so many options. In addition to meeting people, I can just go online and find literally lists and lists and lists of people to connect with. So anything you would say, just kind of to be aware of as you're going out and building up that network?
Rachel, another fantastic question, because the professionals you retain are a reflection of yourself, right? So if you're new to investing and your reputation is everything, and you might say, oh, James, New York City is a huge city. No one's ever going to find out if I cut corners, or if I make an offer and I don't deliver on it, or I retrade at the table, or no, I mean, do the right thing, be known as, you don't cut corners, and you do things by the book, right? First of all, because it's the right thing to do, but so in the same way, you want to make sure that you're dealing with professionals that deal with integrity. And look, maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but yeah, I mean, look, there are professionals out there, and actually they're not professionals. They're ones who are trying to, cut corners or do things that are, not by the book, and it's not worth it. I mean, why again, this is not a get rich overnight. I mean, our listeners are hopefully going to be, building a real estate portfolio over time, and you want it to be done in the right way where people say, hey, you are a pleasure to do business with. If you buy a property and you have a seller who will be a reference, who will say, next time you try to buy a property, you say, hey, Mrs. Jones, call Mr. Carter over here. I just bought a property from him. He'll, if you have any questions on how I perform as a buyer, why don't you speak to him? Right. And so you want to be known as, Rachel, you were a pleasure to work with. You do what you say what you do. Your professionals were attentive. They were on top of things. That's what you want. So, and that's where really the references come in strong, because, people who don't do right, that's really, really short-sighted. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. Just a quick follow-up on that. When we talk about reputation, how important is reputation in this real estate game? I don't know if there's certain practices, you maybe mentioned a couple here, but certain things you've done over your years that you have found have really helped you, or you've seen others do. I'm just curious on how you go about building your reputation.
Yeah, I think I always try to put myself in my client's shoes, right? So as our listeners are reaching out to professionals, it's pretty easy to tell when that person is just trying to, make a sale, so to speak, right? So, I speak to owners, I advise them, James, we're thinking of selling. What do you think? Is now the right time? If it's not the right time, or they need to do something with the property first, I tell them to wait. And that might sound crazy, because there's, I'm sure, plenty of brokers who are just looking to make a quick sale where, hey, I hear someone wants to sell. Great, let's do it. But again, you really have to work with people who take that long view and really put themselves in your shoes and say, I want to make sure that this is the right thing for you, and I'm going to look out for you. So I think that's really important when choosing the professionals you work with. The other thing that you mentioned about, and I didn't want to forget this point, is when dealing with someone's reputation, okay, that doesn't mean that everything always goes right, okay? Real estate is a business where, things happen, right, that are sometimes beyond your control. Unfortunately, I had a lot of clients where they bought 2007, 2008, and then Lehman collapsed, financial markets collapsed. I mean, there was really tough times, right? It didn't matter. You could have been the greatest investor, full of integrity. 07, 08, the market changes. There's nothing you can do. So it doesn't, for your reputation to remain intact, it doesn't mean that you haven't had failures along the way, right? But it's doing the right thing, right? And when I speak, especially when we talk about financial partners, banks, mortgage brokers, they want to know, how did you act, not just when things were good, but when things were bad. Were you, litigious just for the sake of being litigious? Were you reasonable? Were you able to work with? Did you do the right thing? That's really important as well. So I didn't want to miss that point as well.
No, that's excellent. And actually, I was going to ask, I think we might be entering a period, generally speaking, there's maybe a sense of optimism as people say, I went to my first in-person event in 2 years. Sometimes some COVID restrictions are going away or being reduced, which I think creates a general sense of optimism. But I think that we don't want to look at that and not cover the fact that crises do happen occasionally. We just went through the pandemic. You referred to the earlier 07, 08 crisis. I don't know if you saw teams behave differently during those past crises. For example, strong teams that plowed through, got through really well because of a good reputation. So I guess my question is based on, as we look for the future, even if there's a sense of optimism, you always want to be prepared for anything, really.
Yeah, I love that point. And I'm a big fan of James Clear and Atomic Habits and having the right habits. And look, I mean, even for my personal business, our team's business in 2020, I mean, that was a devastating year. I mean, it was for everybody. I mean, we few exceptions. I mean, business was really tough. And the question is, do you continue to do the same things, right? Even when the payoff is no longer there. And at some points, we didn't even know what the future was going to hold, right? But you continue to do the same actions, right? You keep showing up, you keep reaching out because you keep open. You never know when these opportunities are going to happen. And I find that, in tough markets, those down markets, that's what really separates the winners in the market and those who are willing to dig deep. And they're tough times and lean times, but if you put in that time, you're gonna come out of it so much stronger. So but it's it's keeping those same, you can't just in up markets build, grow, and then when things get difficult, completely just say, all right, let's just sit and hang out here on the sidelines. I mean, you really have to keep showing up. So I think that's an important point. So Rachel, one other thing that I wanted to bring up, because it's really, I think, important for building your network. I want to talk about networking as a practice and what it really means. And I've got a good friend, Jeff Michelle, who wrote a book on the topic, One Phone Call Away. And, it's many people think of networking is showing up to an event with a stack of business cards and just handing them out. And you're just looking to advance your own business, right? You're just looking to make that quick sale, that quick introduction, right? Jeff has a very different take on this. And I haven't seen the movie, but I know the premise of pay it forward, right? So think about, as you make connections out there, not what you can get out of that connection, but what you can give, right? So as you're building your network, okay, and I think this is really important, you're not just, meeting these attorneys, these brokers and saying, hey, what's in it for me? What do you got for me, right? It's thinking about, hey, I heard about this trend. What do you think about this? Maybe this is something that you want to look into for your business. Or maybe for a broker, it's, hey, I really appreciate your keeping an eye out for me. I've been looking at some opportunities. I actually found this owner directly who wants to sell. Turns out it's not a property that I want to buy, but I'd be happy to introduce you, right? It's just making it a two-way street. And I think that's really important also, as you think about building your team, is it's not just about building the team so you can be up on a pedestal and succeed. It's like, no, everyone on the team needs to succeed. And a lot of my incredible clients, we've done a lot of business together, but I'm also very grateful to them is that they've made a lot of introductions for me as well. So I really want to make the point that there's a two-way street here, and to consider that as our listeners are going out there and making their.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a great point. I feel like just from knowing you and getting to work with you a little bit, James, you walk that walk. I've seen you pay it forward and look for ways to give. So I think you set a great example actually of that, of building the network in that way. I think to close, I'm curious if you have an example or a podcast we could listen to that really speaks to some of these aspects we've talked about. So making that dream team, getting started, getting that reputation going. Any thoughts you have there?
Yeah, I really believe that, and I'm almost trying to think of the exception, but every single investor, if you listen to any of these podcasts, they all attribute their team, and any of them who've grown their business, right? They all had to build a network around it. So, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, Stephen Kashanian from Closed with a K. You know, he's built out an incredible team. And we've talked a lot about team, meaning your outside, you know, professionals, right? But let's talk about internal too, right? You know, one of the biggest, one of the most important parts of real estate success is the initial investment. Some people have said, you know, there's only one thing that you can never change about a real estate deal, and that's what you paid, right? There can be a lot of outcomes that can change after you bought it and how you improve it, the market conditions, this and that, but finding that opportunity is really important. And, you know, Stephen has built a machine. He's got great people who are out there. Also, another recent interview that I did, David Shorenstein from Hildreth Advisors. You know, I actually entitled the episode Sourcing, because he is a master at finding opportunities, and he built out a team. He had he would hire interns who would come in and write handwritten letters to owners saying, are you interested in selling your property? Save a brokerage fee, call me direct. But so again, if it was just David sitting there in his office writing letters, he wouldn't make it very far. But, you know, he's also built a great team. Myself personally, also, there's no way that I could even do, you know, a tenth of the sales that we do if I didn't have an incredible team. I have a director of operations. We have dedicated analysts. We've got marketing. And then we have sales who are specialists in each of their asset classes, right? And for me, that's a big part of the fun, right? And it's certainly what I'm most proud of in my career. It's not just, you know, personal success as a broker, but really the team and the culture that we built.
So true. It's absolutely essential, like you said. Well, thanks so much for going over these points with us, James. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next things we talk about, which will lean toward finding the gems.
Awesome. Rachel, this has been so much fun. We're making incredible progress here. I know we've been hard at work. We're trading drafts back and forth. I know we got a really tight deadline to get this book going. Which on one hand, yes, we're putting in a lot of hours late at night, you know, weekends, but it's going to be a great product, and I can't wait to get it into the hands of our listeners. I know they're going to love this book, and we promise you very shortly we'll start making some pretty exciting announcements as far as who our publisher is and who our team is to put this book out there. So until then, this is James Nelson, your host of Real Estate Investing, live from New York. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you have not already, please subscribe and please leave comments. Maybe your comment is what you found most helpful in the show. That helps spread the word. That helps others find this podcast. And so we're really grateful for that. If you haven't already, also please connect with me at James Nelson NYC, you know, whether it's Twitter, whether it's LinkedIn, or Instagram. LinkedIn would be the place to send me a message if you have any questions that we're happy to talk about here. And last but not least, check out jamesnelson.com. This is the site that I built for you to give you the inside edge to real estate investing. That's where you can find all these podcasts with the show notes, as well as an exclusive video series, key terms, white papers that I've written. There's a lot of value there. So go check it out and sign up for the mailing list there. Until next week, thank you again.